Okay, well, welcome everybody to this presentation on satellite number 3. Satellite number 3 is far more critical to the profound changes that we are seeing in and upon and around our world than I think any of us really give it credit for. This particular quote that I've put up here from Carl Jung, I think he made this statement 70 or 80 years ago, and it's quite prophetic. It seems that we are only at the threshold of a new spiritual epoch. Certainly millions of people around the world are awakening to this fact. It is profound, radical change. And it's not only change that we're seeing in our technical life, but it's having a profound effect also on our spiritual understanding of who and what we really are. This radical change in science and technology has enabled us to literally go to the furthest reaches of the universe. And again, to a wonderful quote, this one not by Carl Jung, but another Carl Sagan, the astronomer, who said, when asking who are we as a species, who are we? He said, we find that we live on an insignificant planet of a humdrum star lost in a forgotten corner of the universe in which there are far more galaxies than people. And it really is a staggering, profound statement. Or realization, it's more than a statement, it's a profound truth. And this change that's happening technically and scientifically is also having a profound effect on our philosophical and spiritual understanding. Again, to one more quote, this one from Albert Einstein. Science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind. The biggest change that's happening in the sort of philosophical spiritual community, and there's been a big debate about it lately on the internet, is a shift in consciousness. Science has orthodox science has a very limited understanding of consciousness. But people are beginning to realize, like the metaphysician, like the yogi of old, that consciousness exists in everything. In fact, one could argue that it only is consciousness. And as we come into this greater realization, this greater understanding of who and what we are in terms of the cosmos, we also are coming into a new spiritual era of realizing that everything is conscious, everything is living, including the planet here upon which we live, the Mother Earth. And we here in the Aetherius Society maintain that much of the profound change, this quickening that we're all seeing around us in so many different aspects of life, is to do about a shift in consciousness within the Mother Earth herself. To draw this specifically to this spacecraft, satellite number 3, that we're going to learn a lot more about here this afternoon. This spacecraft, we believe, has been orbiting Earth at regular intervals since 1955. And as I say, even though we have been very insular here on Earth, oblivious to the greater universe that is operating all around us, we have been helped by intelligences from beyond this Earth, literally for millions of years. And I'd like now just to play our very first extract. It's just a couple of minutes from a lecture which Dr. King gave in England, I believe, in 1974, a wonderful lecture called The Cosmic Plans.
Let's come to modern times. with this plan. Since Atlantean times, mankind has not been left alone, as indeed he wasn't up to these times. We always have had our great adepts upon earth, mighty adepts such as Krishna, Patanjali, Buddha, Jesus, and others, to teach man, to show him the way away from his own folly, to lead him in a gentle way, to teach him how to give up his free will in order to gain freedom, because you can't have both. There's not a life stream in the world that can have freedom and free will. It's not possible. It's illogical. It's against all the laws of nature. It's not until you have conquered your free will, controlled your free will, that you get freedom. Then and only then can you break away from the chain of rebirth on this planet. Then you will know freedom.
Essentially, what satellite number 3 does when it comes into orbit of Earth is it radiates a higher frequency of energy to all people, whether they're aware of satellite number 3 or not. A higher frequency that goes to all people who are somehow engaged in some kind of selfless spiritual work. And it enhances, it magnifies that activity by a factor of 3,000 times. Now, I have to say that I think that what we're dealing with here is homeopathic doses. But we also know that homeopathic doses can, in their own way, be very powerful. And as I mentioned earlier on, I think a part of the profound shift in consciousness, this rise in consciousness that is beginning to emerge at a grassroots level around our world, can be attributed to the effects of satellite number 3 radiating this higher frequency of energy to, as I say, all people who are engaged in some kind of selfless spiritual work. We are seeing this rise in different forms. We're seeing our world being transformed to this higher level of consciousness, seeing ourselves much more as one human race. And in many ways we're outpacing our politicians, and we're outpacing our economic system. This rise in consciousness, this shift that is taking place. And as I say, becoming much more open and seeing, not judging people the way we have judged people in the past, but seeing all people as being people of value, people who need to be recognized. Recognizing also a need to care profoundly for our planet. And this is a subtle influence of satellite number 3 that is permeating and has been permeating humanity since 1955 in a very, very gentle, very natural, very unobtrusive way. This is a not to scale picturization of the main functions of satellite number 3, drawing down solar and cosmic energies through a very specially constructed dome ceiling, drawing it in through these 3 pyramid crystals here down in the bottom left, which are then transmitted to that large egg-shaped figure or symbol, and then transmitted from the egg shape through this matrix at the bottom of the craft down to individuals on Earth who are, as I say, engaged in some kind of selfless spiritual activity. But let me just read, I know this is familiar to some of you, but it'll help those of you who aren't familiar with this operation within satellite number 3. It'll give you a better understanding. It took place in, I believe, 1956. Dr. King projected an astral projection to satellite number 3, and this is his account of that experience. I was inside the third satellite. I became immediately aware that I was in a huge room housing a tremendous amount of beautifully designed apparatus. The whole place was filled with a soft, exquisite radiance, more beautiful than that found in any place on Earth. The atmosphere was filled with an alluring perfume, not strong enough to be detected by the physical senses, but denotable by the reaction it had upon my etheric body. This perfume was an energy, which, if concentrated upon, would bring on the deeper states of trance, regarded on Earth as samadhi. Even though I did not really concentrate upon or tune into this perfume energy, its presence had a clearing effect upon my mind. In the middle of the ceiling, covering about a quarter of its huge domed surface, there was a large circular window. This was made of pure crystal, very finely ground, and completely free from all flaws, such as those which might be found in terrestrial glass, which would be likely to blur the images seen through it. The crystal window allowed the free passage of all solar rays, as well as magnetic rays coming from other planetary bodies, which latter shone against the purple background of space with a scintillating brilliance never observed from the surface of Earth. The huge crystal window could be made into a filter by charging it with certain energies, affecting its selection of solar and magnetic rays. During this charging process, the crystal changed color from a soft rose pink to a pulsating violet, according to the selection imposed by the operators of the satellite. Beneath the huge window stood 3 large crystal prisms, which broke up the solar spectrum into its primary colors. Each spectrometric color was then split into 7 further shades by another large crystal which held my fascinated gaze. This huge crystal structure seemed to be about 25 to 30 feet high, shaped like a giant egg. What its physical weight must have been, I do not know, but it defied all the known laws of gravity, because it floated in space, being neither fastened to the domed ceiling or to the metal floor of the spacecraft. Slowly revolving around this great egg-shaped crystal were numerous other multi-shaped crystalline formations. These moved in slow procession from the top to the bottom in an elliptical orbit. They passed from the tip of the ovoid and the great domed roof of the spacecraft to continue their travel down the side of it, passing between the bright metal floor and the bottom of this gigantic egg. The great ovoid glowed as from some internal fires, obviously radiating energies which were conditioned by something within it. The primary colors of the solar rays, broken down by the 3 huge prisms, were absorbed into the ovoid structure and radiated outwards, each one split up again into 7 further aspects of energy. These colours I could not name, because I have never seen their equivalent on Earth. But I did notice with great interest that when each primary colour was broken down by the ovoid, the resultant energy seemed to flow slowly, like a kind of liquid capable of being guided through the transmitting mechanism. The latter was made of a type of metal unknown to me, in the shape of a large matrix. This matrix was formed of intricate lines of metal which ran in very finely cut channels, intersecting each other at exactly 90-degree angles. In fact, I was later informed that this angle of intersection was computed so exactly that the whole matrix had to be built in space, so that the curvature of a planetary mass would not affect the precise angles of intersection. From this matrix, the conditioned energies were radiated to any destination on Earth. The amazing scientists on the 3rd satellite have, by a simple process of light manipulation, isolated the universal life forces referred to by the sages as prana. These subtle pranas are the energies with which the manipulators on the 3rd satellite are flooding this dark little planet during every magnetization period. They can blend and interweave them in complicated patterns and guide the resultant energies to any spot on the surface of Earth. I noticed immediately that all the crystals in the 3rd satellite, unlike terrestrial jewels, seemed to glow from the inside outwards. I learned later that these crystals were grown to an exact size and had a vibrational capability thousands of times that of normal terrestrial quartz. I did not have the honor of meeting the great cosmic adept known as Mars Sector 6 during this visit to the 3rd satellite, but I did have the pleasure of meeting another great master who answered all my mental questions. As I entered the huge operations room and looked about me, noting the mechanisms I have previously described, he approached. He was a full 7 feet tall with broad shoulders, narrow waist, and I noted quickly abnormally small feet for a man of his stature. His skin was so suntanned that it looked a glossy cinnamon color. He wore a one-piece suit, tight from the neck to the ankles. I did not see any seam or pocket or even a fold in that suit. It seemed to fit him as though it had been poured around him. In fact, rather than a suit, it seemed to be some type of force screen. Although, as I reflect back now, I still believe that it was a solid garment of some kind. He looked about 30 years of age, but I learned later that he was at least 10 times that age. His eyes were dark and deep. His long brown silken hair hung down to his broad shoulders. For a moment I caught his eyes and saw in them the depths of wisdom I have never seen in any terrestrial eyes. As I was present in a projected state, I would have been completely invisible to an ordinary earthling, but he saw me easily and also could read my every thought. I noticed that his garment reflected the shades of the many hues of light playing on it, giving it a type of silvery sheen. When he moved, he did so with a controlled grace of a large cat. He gave me the impression of great physical strength and keen mental alertness. As I had spent an average of 8 hours a day for the past 10 years in the practice of yoga, which entailed a close study of the existence and natural flow of prana, the first question that I wanted to ask was an obvious one. If, I telepathed, these great energies flow through space naturally, then why are you intensifying the activity at this time? The Martian smiled, and when he did so, his dark, deep eyes lit up with a light of complete understanding. He moved over to a rectangular-shaped control panel, above which a large screen glowed dully. There was no noise as he manipulated several dials upon a panel before him, but a picture of a planet sprung onto the screen in vivid colours. Earth, like an habitual drunkard, is insensible to subtle stimulus, stated the Martian soberly, his beautiful choice of words cut right down to the heart of the problem, making long explanations not only unnecessary, but superfluous. That is Earth. Please notice the activity in the ionization belts. I could see part of Earth glowing below very brightly on one side, gradually being shaded off on the dark side, which was turned away from the sun. As other dials were adjusted, the projection of the mass of Earth itself was reduced to a dim background, almost blotted out by a sea of violently agitated sparks, which buffeted against one another, splitting each other into smaller particles, in turn entering the nucleus of other atoms, causing minute explosions. Thus was the chain ever going on from molecule to atom throughout the whole great belt surrounding Earth. That activity is magnified 30 million times so that you can see it easily, went on my Martian instructor. With such activity as that, forming a barrier to the influx of the more subtle energies, you can understand the motive which prompts our activities here. The basic action of the ionospheric belts has been intensified by radioactive release within these units, which act as natural filters to break down cosmic rays bombarding Earth. This intensification of ionic flux interacts upon cosmic and solar rays in such a way as to reflect too much of their energy away from Earth, hence the need for terrestrial bombardment from this sector. Now, watch carefully. The picture on the screen changed, and the whole world seemed to be rushing towards us at fantastic speed. So intently had I been observing the screen that my mind was now captured by this latest development, causing every fibre of my etheric being to thrill to the apparent speed at which we were travelling. Actually, we had not moved from our orbit. The picture was the thing which changed as the focal length of the telescopic apparatus was lengthened to make the planet appear to be nearer. Europe, the British Isles, England, Middlesex, London, Mayfair, a street in Mayfair, and a solitary man staggering along under the lamps of that street came into view. This living image materialized on the screen with such startling suddenness that I gasped in amazement. From over 1,500 miles away, the wonderful Martian had been able to narrow down the field of vision to one single person in one single street. I could even see his rugged features plainly. The black bow tie around his neck was not straight. The silk-faced lapels on his evening dress were crumpled. As though this was not feat enough, the Martian continued to perform wonders with the dials until the terrestrial's aura came into view. "That man is intoxicated," stated the Martian. I could see the murky, thick, greyish aura surrounding the inebriate as he staggered about the pavement. I caught his jumbled thought pattern and recoiled at its revolting content. Still in mental language, the Martian observed with a smile, "Not too good, is it?" Now, such a man as that is becoming impervious to the higher aspects of mind, for he has taken within himself an alcoholic substance which is virtually causing an auric ossification. His aura is so clogged as to reflect away the more subtle, outside, energetic stimuli. The ionization units of Earth are becoming ossified, rather like that man's aura. As alcohol acts upon that human aura, so radioactivity reacts upon the auric envelope of Earth, in a different way perhaps, but the results are similar, causing a coarsening or ossification of a very finely spun web, and obstructing the passage of nature's finer forces. Therefore, we have to intensify this existing magnetic flow, the intensity being predetermined by the terrestrial ability to absorb and use these energies. Look here. I'll leave it there, but as I say, this was in 1955 or 1956. It was during the Cold War when we had tremendous nuclear atomic experimentation going on, firstly with the atom bomb, later the hydrogen bomb. And we'll hear in this extract that I'm about to play, Dr. King referring to that and what brought about this change in enabling satellite number 3 to come into orbit of this Earth. Because, again, as mentioned, as we're emerging to this higher level of understanding, of consciousness, of who and what we really are within this vast and mighty cosmos, the Earth herself is a living being, and it's central to our philosophy in the Aetherius Society. It's not part of our lecture this afternoon, but that the Earth is not only a living being, but had her own conscious initiation, or was due to have it, and it did have such an initiation in 1964, where the vibrations on this Earth would be raised, and it is necessary for those of us on Earth, if we are to be able to withstand this rise in spiritual vibration, to also raise our vibration to a higher level of consciousness. And satellite number 3, as I mentioned, is a key catalyst behind the scenes, bringing or helping to bring that about. But, as we heard in the reading, and as we'll hear more about later on this afternoon, satellite number 3, by the law of karma, can really only help us as much as we help ourselves. So, Oscar, if you wouldn't mind now playing this extract, as I say, was given in a lecture by Dr. King just east of here in Fontana, California, on July the 24th, 1960. We're going to hear the second part of this talk he gave on satellite number 3.
Now, throughout the years, or put it this way, in the past, mankind, or the spiritual aspects of mankind, the spiritual workers, were very limited. You had to be a certain stage of initiation before you could gain
sufficient energy to do very much good in the world. This state of affairs existed until a very significant happening took place. A significant happening which was to result in the vaporization of 600,000 women, children, and old people in 2 Japanese cities. I needn't remind you what this happening was. You know. We had again on this earth rediscovered atomic energy. We had again on this earth used atomic energy for the 3rd time on this earth to kill, to maim, to cripple children. We had again used a power which is virtually a God-given building power. The atom is God's building blocks, you know. A God-given building power. We had used it for wrongful purposes. Thou shalt not kill, being the law. When this happened, the cosmic hierarchy made a certain very clever and not very apparent, but nevertheless very definite move. Now, divine intervention as such could not be allowed, because this earth had got itself into such a rotten karmic position that divine intervention could not come to the mass of humanity. But intervention could come in certain ways, and one way was the orbit around this earth of this 3rd satellite, so that the spiritual workers throughout the world could get sufficient energy and power to do their good. You're all very fortunate. You don't realize, or some of you do, but the majority don't realize how fortunate they are. If they did, they wouldn't be able to contain themselves from joy. A few years ago, and not many, a few years ago, you would have to be equal to an adept to be able to manipulate the energy any man, woman, or child in that audience can tonight. That's why I say you're extremely fortunate. There's an old saying that says an ill wind, it's an ill wind that blows nobody any good. The attack or the use of atomic energy for foul, sinful, and wrongful purposes actually, in a strange way, was to prove a great help to the spiritual people on the earth, because the 3rd satellite could then come in orbit and give to each and every one of you powers equivalent to those only used by adepts in the past. Now, how does this power affect you? How does it work? Well, first of all, I would like to say that the 3rd satellite, despite its vast bulk, cannot be seen by the naked eye. It's invisible. I'll tell you why it's invisible. If you have your spectacles on, and I hold that up now, you will see it. Why will you see it? Because there is a stream of photons hitting that white paper, being reflected from that white paper, impinging themselves through the lenses you call eyes on the nervous system of the brain, and this white paper manifests to you as white paper. Simple. Supposing I wanted to make that white paper invisible, how would I do it? I would do it in one of two ways. One of three ways. Number one, turn the light out. Supposing that this can't be done, then I would adopt number two, dematerialize it and put it in another system of dimensions. But supposing I wanted to use this as paper to write on, I couldn't do that. So therefore I would have to adopt number three. The photons come from the light, hit here and go back. So the answer is obvious. All I have to do is I can't put the light out. I can't dematerialize it, but what I can do is to stop the photons going back to you. And if I do that, I can hold that paper up all night. You can get a 1,000,000-volt arc lamp, put it on that paper, and it will still be quite invisible. Why? Because the photons are not reflected from it. Now supposing I have around this piece of paper a magnetic screen, and supposing I quite willing to allow the photons to come against this magnetic screen, but instead of them allowing them to bounce back, I revolve them around through the magnetic screen in a 360-degree arc. That paper becomes invisible, and yet it's still paper and still usable. This method of invisibility is adopted by the space people on a lot of their craft, and certainly by the people on satellite number 3. I said it can't be tracked by radar. What is a radar? A radar is a wireless apparatus that emits a pulse, a radio pulse, a regular radio pulse. The radio pulse virtually consists of a stream of particles. Science is still debating now whether they're particles or whether they're magnetic energy in a pure state. I'll tell you what they are particles. Emits a stream of radar particles. These particles go out through space until they hit our white paper, and then they're reflected back. Picked up, the image is shown on an oscilloscope, and that white paper looks like a tiny blob on the oscilloscope. Now, supposing I didn't want the white paper seen by radar. I've already made it invisible, but radar can still pick it up. But supposing I don't want radar to pick it up, what do? Simple. Absorb the radar particles into the same force screen, and radar can bombard it all night, still not show up as a ghost or image on the oscilloscope. This is how the space people make satellite number 3 invisible. What are these manipulations? Well, I'll tell you. The third satellite is there solely to send energy down to people who will use this energy in any way for the benefit of mankind. People needn't be an adept to use it. Ordinary people can use this energy. And how does it work? Well, it works according to a very strict formula. Nothing that the space people do, by the way, is haphazard, and they are great cosmic scientists. And everything they do does work to a strict formula, by the way. Now let us take a hypothetical case. Supposing Mrs. Smith hears of her friend Mrs. Jones being hurt and put in hospital. What's the first thing Mrs. Smith does if she's a decent-minded person with a spiritual outlook? She says a little prayer for Mrs. Jones. This is the first thing she does. When she says a prayer for Mrs. Jones, what is she doing? Well, she is directing a beam of energy from herself to Mrs. Jones, because that is prayer. Prayer is a way to direct energy from point A to point B through the control of thoughts. That is prayer. So, she directs this beam of energy by thought control to Mrs. Jones. Let us suppose that Mrs. Smith prays for 15 minutes for Mrs. Jones, and let us suppose that in 15 minutes she directs X units of energy towards Mrs. Jones. When the third satellite is in operation, if Mrs. Smith prays for the same 15 minutes in the same room, in the same way, for the same Mrs. Jones, for the same complaint, she will not direct X units of energy towards her. She will direct 3,000 X units of energy towards her. In other words, all prayer, all healing, all teaching, all spiritual things are enhanced 3,000 times during the time that this satellite is in orbit. All spiritual activities. If any of you, and you can all use this, it's there for you to use. You're entitled to use this energy. If any of you are planning any spiritual event at all, any move of a spiritual nature, or to do with spiritual things, higher things, no matter what it may be, then try to fix that move so that it falls in the time that this satellite is orbiting round the Earth, and you will be helped greatly by unseen but nevertheless present hands to bring this move about. If you are concerned with teaching, you will be helped to teach. Healing, you will be helped to heal. Whatever it is, you will be helped. Not by a presence, not by messages, because you will not, repeat, not receive messages from the third satellite. It's closed to radiation of messages, except through one channel. This is to avoid confusion, and only to avoid confusion. But you will receive something far more vital, far more important, far more usable, far more practical in a lot of ways. That is a beam of energy. And the beam of energy put down by the third satellite is put on individuals and groups of individuals throughout the Earth. And this beam, these individual beams, are the size of 1,000th part of the finest hair on your head. They are invisible beams, but they have strength to move mountains, if you have the faith to move mountains. Third satellite operate on behalf of all of us, on this Earth. And this satellite, my friends, is there for your use. Now you might say, well, how can the people on this satellite be sure that the energy we use will only be used for spiritual purposes? For instance, the energy in the atom is good. It's God-given energy. It's the way that mankind use it that is wrong. Then you might say, well, how can the space people be certain? I'll tell you something that you haven't been told before, unless you've heard me say it. You are known. You are known so completely that it's almost awe-inspiring. There isn't a man, woman, and child on this earth today who is not only known on this earth now, but his past life is also known, and his future lives are also known. There is a complete, absolute dossier and record on each and every one of you. There will never be any attempt to interfere with your free will, because such an attempt is against the law. But you're known. And the space people know quite completely who will use this energy properly and who will not use this energy properly. In this way, they can govern it accordingly. You can sit next door to a person and receive a beam of this energy yourself if you're doing spiritual work, and the person next door to you wouldn't even be aware of what is happening. You may not be aware of what is happening, and yet it could be happening right under their very nose. We've seen cases of it. We've proved cases of it over and over again throughout the years, because the Aetherius Society has been working on this project for years.
I'd like now to play a couple of extracts from Master Aetherius and again Mars Sector 6, which were given through Dr. King in New York, again period photograph, on February the 28th, 1960, in a transmission called From Freewill to Freedom.
During this time, satellite number 3 is in orbit of Terra. We will orbit about 1,550 miles from your surface. We will be undetectable by Earth instruments for reasons you have already been informed. During this time, we will radiate energy of a high vibratory nature unto all those individuals and groups upon Terra who will use this energy for the benefit of their brothers. Automatically, you too become a beneficiary. How can you do this? I will repeat myself for your benefit. By being of service to others, and by being of service to others at this holy time, bringing down the great energy and power from satellite number 3 down through you, out unto your suffering brother, to suffering, downtrodden humanity, and helping to raise them. This is the great key, the great yoga, the great practice, the great Christianity, the great religion, the greatest deeds that you can do in these days. Service, service, service is the key which will open the doors to all the powers, to all forms of enlightenment. Service to others. 1,000 years ago, it was meditation in the silence. Today it is service in the noise, service in the clatter, service in the foulness, in the smell, in the ignorance of mankind. Use the great powers, my dear friends. I appeal to you. And then all the things of nature will be given unto you.
Well, the Aetherius Study has been cooperating with satellite number 3 since 1955, mainly through prayer, also, as we heard, by going to the holy mountains of the world, both inside and outside of a spiritual push. The mountains, much like satellite number 3, they're a source of higher frequency energy that we can tap into that we would not otherwise have at this critically urgent time of change, great change upon our world. Another one, of course, is Operation Prayer Power, where we invoke energy and store it in this crystal battery. And since 1977, these energies have been they've been offered to satellite number 3, who have manipulated these energies on our behalf. I don't have time to go into Operation Prayer Power. I think most of you know about Operation Prayer Power, but it is another way that satellite number 3 is helping humanity at this time. We also have what we call spiritual energy radiators. Satellite number 3 beams energy onto that receiver up there at the top right. This is radionic apparatus that was designed by Dr. George King, and the energy runs through these radionic machines and then is transmitted out through an antenna. It's one way the Aetherius Society is cooperating with satellite number 3 and helping to flood our world with this higher frequency spiritual energy to help bring about this transformation, this great change in the most positive way that we possibly can. And as I say, I think that despite all the headlines, the terrible news that we see, particularly at this time with the situation in Syria and elsewhere, but there is this greater, higher spiritual awareness that is just sort of gathering strength, this higher consciousness all around the world. People becoming much more concerned about how we're living on this planet, the need to cooperate much more, the need to share. The far greater desire, I believe, of people not wanting to be engaged in war, wanting to find peaceful resolutions to our conflicts. And I think the more we go into this century, hopefully, we will move away from war, this scourge that's blighted humanity and our very limited thinking, on our very limited understanding on this little planet. I think that we are evolving more and more into a culture that is moving away from that the blight in our character, because we're becoming more conscious, not just of who we are, but that same consciousness in everything, in everyone, in all life, in our plants, in our trees, the animals, the planet itself. And this is all a part of the great change that is being influenced by satellite number 3. In 1988, Dr. King always used to, prior to 1988, each year Dr. King would be contacted by Mars Sector 6 and given the dates of the spiritual pushes for each particular year. But knowing that Dr. King would not always be around, in 1988, these were confirmed for each year. And they are, as you can see there, April the 18th to May 23rd, July the 5th to August the 5th, September the 3rd to October the 9th, and November the 4th to December the 10th. And during these periods, we know satellite number 3 is in orbit of Earth, and it's when our spiritual energy radiators are activated. We hold power circles, and of course we release our prayer power energy on a weekly basis to satellite number 3. Satellite number 3 is not theory, it's practice. And what I'd like to do for those who are able and would like to stay is just spend 10 minutes just tuning into satellite number 3, because it is in orbit at this time, and feeling that vibration coming down mentally as we attract it. And we will just do 3 short prayers to send that energy out and to have our own conscious experience of satellite number 3. As I say, it's not theory, it's practice, and it's putting the theory into practice.